Welcome to Resilience Development in Action with Steve Bisson. This is the podcast dedicated to first responder mental health, helping police, fire, EMS, dispatchers, and paramedics create better growth environments for themselves and their teams. Let's get started.
Well, hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm so happy to have you here. I'm hoping that you guys continue to like and subscribe if you think about it, and then put in a review. Those reviews are always helpful. But today I have someone that I met through online, and I read her book, and it's called one of her books. I didn't read the other one yet, but I'm going to be reading it, calling Helping the Helpers. But this one is Dump the Bucket. Let's see. Healing Trauma in Police with EMDR. I'm covering her name. That's not fair. I read the book. You know me, I never lie on my podcast. You can see there's a little crease, there's little notes, there's a whole nine thing. But the good thing is Stacy already sucked up to me. She signed the first page. So, haha, I got a signed version. But in all reality, it making EMDR reachable for first responders is so important. And this book does it in droves. So welcome, Dr. Stacy Raymond. This is the last time I'm going to call you doctor. Welcome to Resilience Development in Action.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
I think that, I introduced a little bit of both books already, but, you're much more than two books, I'm assuming. Anyway, I hope. But I really felt like I got to talk to you a few minutes before the interview. And then, we've exchanged a few times. We seem very similar. I think we have a karaoke night that we're going to do sometime.
Yes, right.
But how about you introduce yourself to my audience who may not know who you are?
Sure. All right. So I'm Stacy Raymond. I've been a clinical psychologist in private practice for 27 years. So I work in Ridgefield, Connecticut. I am a peer support clinical supervisor for a local police department. I grew up raised by a Marine and a police officer. He just turned 90 yesterday. So
Wow.
he said, Marines don't die. They just go to hell and regroup. That's what he told me. So I'm going to follow that. So it was difficult at times, to be raised by someone with that background, especially because he came from his own issues even before he enlisted in the military. But that was my first understanding of what it was like to be a police officer, at least to live with one and to see the work that he did and how it impacted him, and to live with somebody with post-traumatic stress that never addressed it because, he's 90 and that age group, they don't talk about it. Like I've tried to talk to, I've talked to other veterans, combat vets. I've talked to police officers that have been in some pretty bad calls. And he says, no, we're not talking about it. And that's that. So my first job was, I was a psychologist in a women's prison, FCI Danbury, and I had to become weapons trained. And also in self-defense. And, it was the population. There were 900 women behind the wall, 150 in the camp. And just learning that most of those women came from an abuse background. And then they picked the people that they hung out with, either gangs or prostitution or engaged in activities that were illegal, and they ended up in prison. So the effect of abuse on the human psyche and how the adult unfolds from there, I found that very interesting. But also very interesting was that the COs, the correctional officers, they themselves had a lot of issues, alcohol, short fuse, angry outbursts, inappropriate relationships with the inmates, some sneaking drugs into the prison for sexual favors, just a side of officers that I went in very naive, and then, realized that their stress level dealing with inmates, walking into an institution where you can actually feel it. When you come through the Sally Port, there's this heaviness because there's 900 people in there that are not going to leave. They will leave eventually. We had a couple of lifers, but, it's a very heavy environment. And then starting around 2015, I started getting more and more trauma clients. I started seeing firefighters, police, dispatchers, paramedics, EMTs, and veterans, combat veterans. And I found, much to my surprise, I was just so comfortable with this population. I knew how to talk to them. They knew how to relate to me. They would open up to me. And so that became like a real intense interest of mine. And then I became involved with the local police department, and then I became SISM trained. I do debriefs on a regular basis now. I give presentations locally on post-traumatic stress, how to identify it, and what to do about it. And I do that at police departments and fire departments. So that's me.
So you don't do much. Is that what you're saying?
Right. And then there's my civilian clients who they also have abuse histories, or they have their own traumas, perhaps a spouse that died by suicide, or they lost a child in a car accident, or they have a terminal diagnosis. It's all trauma. It's just all trauma that I deal with. And I use EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy. And I find that to be the most effective, quickest way to alleviate the effects of trauma.
Yeah. And I mean, there's so many things, all joking aside, that we can go towards here because
Yeah.
I think that for me, like the thing that's really helped guide my treatment sometimes, because I am EMDR trained, just like yourself.
Mhm. Yeah.
I'm not EMDR IA for my own personal reasons that I shall share maybe offline here. But I've done it for about 12 years. I follow
Uh-huh.
trainings, and it's such the most effective tool. You mentioned SISM, the crisis intervention.
Stress management. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so important too. Peer support, I can go down so many aisles because I think peer support is one of the things that is underused, but sometimes it's underused because people who are put in a peer support place sometimes gab to their own department, and that's the biggest no.
Right. There has to be confidentiality. But the other thing I've observed, and I've talked to other clinicians who work with police and fire, sometimes the people that need peer support the most or need therapy the most are peer supporters, because they come from that background where it's okay for me to be there for you, but I can't ask for help. I don't need me. No, I don't need help, but I'll be there for you. So that's my understanding. And not everybody on peer support, it comes from, a damaged history, but a lot of them do. And then, yeah, if you can't trust your peer support team because they might talk to command staff, well, that's a problem. That's not going to work.
I want to just start off maybe about a little bit about that, because to me, the ACEs is just the most important thing to do as a therapist, particularly working with first responders.
All right.
I do like working with my civilians, particularly people with trauma. And I'm pulling out the book because literally one of my favorite part is exactly what I share with the first responder world. It's the research stuff that you talked about. ACEs is adverse child events, just for everyone to know. And it's only 10 questions. They're pretty yes or no answers, very easy to do. Sorry if I do a little education here, but to me, that's the greatest thing. I'm pulling the book because, I didn't know what the numbers were for civilians. So thank you for pulling that in, because I never looked those up. But,
It's the average score is a 1, and that's based on 17,500 surveys that were given to civilians. So the average score is a 1. So technically, even a 2 that's 100% higher, right? That's considered a high score, 2 and up. And then you want to comment on cops?
Yeah, well, that's what I was thinking, is that you just 2.6 is for the cops, and that's a research from 2025.
Yeah.
But then they have 3.5 and 3.6, which is typically what I hear about a 4 personally. I've never done the exact math.
Yeah.
But I think that explaining what a 4 is to people, and also realizing that while it does indicate, and again, I say the whole world post-traumatic stress disorder. I know that's a dirty word sometimes in.
Yeah, we call it an injury because when we use the word disorder, which is what's in the DS-5, people feel like, oh, that's something like attention deficit disorder. I'm going to have that for the rest of my life. And I've sat with so many people, civilians and first responders and veterans, that yes, they meet the criteria for the disorder according to the DSM-5, but when we're done, they do not meet the criteria. And so they do not have that issue anymore.
But, explaining a little bit about what for me personally, I agree with you. I get that. I tell people, especially the younger guys, I'm like, let's keep it acute stress and then never get to the post-traumatic stress. That's the important part. I like to address it in the front, not in the
acute
back.
Stress, though, technically, right? I'm going to get clinical here. You can't call it acute stress after a month.
I know, but that's what I mean. But trying to get people into wellness visits, talking to people
Right.
about
Yeah. Yeah.
assessments,
Yeah. Right.
stuff like that. You
Act
know,
on it when it is acute stress, right? Because it's all the symptoms of post-traumatic stress, right? Sleep disruption, it could be nightmares, it could be intrusive images, it could be, hyper startle, hyper vigilance, having a short fuse with other people. You don't have to check all of those, but if you check most of them, and you just had an event that happened, right? It could be a suicide in your department. It could be a child death that you attended as a first responder, whatever the case may be. Acting on it before it becomes like locked into your nervous system. Act on it when it's acute stress, and it will never be called post-traumatic stress.
right.
So
That's
that's what
kind of,
I think Steve's saying is, right, Steve? Like act on it early.
I think that that's why I talk about that because I tell, like, I just had a gentleman, I'm going to just say there was 3 adverse events, significant adverse events,
Okay.
less than 12 hours.
Oh, wow.
And they contacted me within a week. And
Right. So
we work,
that's
we
the
worked
dumpster fire.
intensely. And that was the dumpster fire. But guess what? We
Yeah,
put the dumpster fire out. And yeah, does he think about it sometimes? Sure, but it's not distressing anymore to him.
correct.
And
Right.
the younger guy, and he's like, why don't people do that? I'm like, because you got to be a tough guy and let it really fuck you up over a year.
Well, here's the problem, right? It's the stigma against getting help. I think
Right.
younger people are much more open to talking about it or addressing it. Younger people will move past acute trauma faster than older people just because our brains are just a little more entrenched as we get older. So, young person coming in more willing to try, therapy can move right past those 3 traumas that happened within a 12-hour period, and it feels like a miracle for people when they actually do that. But if the older school people, they're going to be like, well, yeah, so my sleep is a little disrupted right now, and yeah, I've had a few nightmares and I have some intrusive images or whatever, but I'm going to tell you right now, their go-to is going to be alcohol. And for the most part, and let's see how this goes. But when you see how it goes, it then takes root into your brain, and it's harder to disentangle it from your day-to-day experience, right? So then it kind of shows its ugly head when you least expect it. You could, 2 months after the incident, you could be having dinner, and then all of a sudden you're thinking about the dead child incident, and you don't know why. So a lot of them think that they're losing their mind. I must be crazy. And so I don't really want to let anyone in on that because I don't want to lose my gun and my badge, and I don't want to be judged, and I don't want to be passed over for promotion and all that. But if you look at it as tactical resiliency, go and get help so that you can stay sharp and you can then sleep better. Then you don't have to drink as much in order to deal with the symptoms. And that's tactical readiness. It's not just making sure that you've got your vest on and your gun's clean and loaded and everything, all your gear is ready to go. It's making sure that this is ready to go. So that's really the gist of my book, and like going in and doing EMDR, which is not like CBT. It's not, cops don't have to talk about the nitty-gritty details of the dead baby call. I could ask them to go to the worst part of that, and that's where we start, right there. Go to the worst part. Get an image in your head of the worst part of that call. You do not have to tell me the details about it. Because a lot of them are afraid of getting emotional too, right? This is alpha males, they're like, damn, last thing I want to do is cry.
And I think that that's exactly what, one of my training with the EMDR, it was with the EMDR IA. When we,
IA meaning, just so people know, it's
thank you.
EMDRIA, which is the International Association. So you can belong to it and you don't have to belong to it, but you can still be certified in EMDR.
Thank you for this. I forget sometimes, so I do
That's all right.
appreciate that. But what I told people is like my first experience when we had to do it ourselves, I ended up with someone who was like, she didn't want to say what it was.
Uh-huh.
So I ended up doing my first ever experience with EMDR was not talking about what was going on,
Uh-huh.
seeing her cry, doing the passes. Again, I was brand new, so I was still like, by the book, 15 to 20, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, yeah.
But what I tell people is that nothing really scares that fright more than someone not talking on your first ever one. And then suddenly everyone's done and she's still going on. So everyone turns to you with this nonverbal person doing that. And I think that that's how I explain, like, you don't need to tell me the details.
No.
You can have those thoughts in your mind. But when
Right.
you say, okay, then I'm going to start.
It's
I don't,
really
I,
a
yeah,
private experience in their head that the healing is happening privately, kind of in their head. And then when you stop either the eye movements or if they're holding the tappers and it's buzzing left and
I
right.
just do the tappers because I find
Yeah.
them less distracting. But what I was going to say is that the other part too is when you don't address the front end, like we said, the younger guys doing that a lot better nowadays than they ever
Yeah.
did. What
Yeah.
happens is you're going to open up whatever the no trigger here, trigger warning for those who are upset. You see the dead child, but that might open another channel of other stuff that you saw.
Yeah.
It opens another channel. And now suddenly you have 6, 7, 8, 9, 12, 20 adverse events that you got to kind of process. They typically, you don't do all 20, but I'm not going to go there it's too much detail.
Right. That's where it's the clinician's call as far as, do we write it down and table it for later, or is it really something that needs to be gone after in this session? So that comes with experience as a clinician. So.
Just a quick break. Guys, I'm going to talk about a new product that I really like. I actually bought one of their hoodies. It was amazing, and I really enjoyed wearing it. This episode is going to be supported by Deemed Fit. Deemed Fit is a first responder-owned activewear and leisure brand. And one thing that I genuinely like about them is that they support different causes. I actually gave a few people I know who work with first responders or nonprofits their name to Deemed Fit, and I know they're talking to them. They do a lot of initiatives and collections that are based on mental health for first responders. And if you go there right now and you buy anything, including the mental health support stuff, use the code RDA15. That's right, RDA15 to get 15% off on any products that you get. Again, it's called RDA15. Go to deemedfit.com, DEEMEDFIT.com, and enjoy 15% off at checkout to save. Now, right back to the episode. Well, I think that that's where I wanted to go with that. That's exactly, having this education. I think there's two types of education. I feel like I do a lot of education with the people who want EMDR.
Yeah.
Who want, as you mentioned in the book, I'm not going to make the memory disappear. I'm just going to make it so that it's in the rear view mirror and it's there.
Right.
Number two, I think the other part too is explaining to clinicians in particular. I think sometimes the clinicians are so like, I do believe in some of the structure of it, but sometimes you got to move a little bit of the structure for XYZ reasons.
Correct.
I think that for me, there's two things I want to talk about can you tell me more? What's your, why, the entrance of EMDR to clinicians and first responders? I feel a lot of resistance comes from the clinicians as well as the first responders. Can you explain a little bit of what their resistance are, what they go through? I think you talk about it in the book, but I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Resistance. So who are you asking about for resistance?
Both on the police side, and then sometimes the clinicians. I find that clinicians do not understand how to work with first responders.
Correct. And so in my experience and talking to clinicians who are very experienced working with first responders is the first responders want to just get in and get out. They want to do EMDR. They don't need a whole lot of preparation. Obviously, you need to have them understand what EMDR is. You have to establish a calm place. You have to make sure that they can handle the emotions of what's going to come up, right? But then once they're ready, it's go time. It's like, and usually, I let people pick what they want to work on. And so they're going to pick something from their work experience. But if they are of the group that have come from adverse childhood experiences, eventually we're going to get to that. If they were hit as a kid and it resulted in bruises or cuts, if they were constantly criticized that they could do better, or if they felt like no one really cared. If you're going to cry like that, go to your room. Or being called a sissy or a baby, for crying. Stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about, right? So that's emotional neglect. Okay. And so eventually we end up back at those traumas, and those are childhood traumas. But you don't have to worry about police and fire, especially, being too fragile to jump into the first target memory. They're very hardy people. these first responders and even the combat vets. But what you have to obviously screen for is alcohol abuse, right? Because there's not going to be any progress made if they're actively abusing alcohol. They may feel relief after doing an EMDR session, but you lose that ground between first session and second session if they're going home and drinking. Because those, whatever neural pathways that were broken and then rewired. And what I mean by broken is that, and I don't mean that in a harsh way, but that that image that just keeps coming up, keeps coming up, keeps coming up, that starts to go away during EMDR. And then other ways of looking at that trauma start to develop. That development will go away if the person is going home and drinking. So the person has to be modifying their alcohol intake, and or they need to go to rehab first, and if they're that bad, because EMDR is going to just stir up more emotion than they're going to be able to handle, and they're going to try to handle it with alcohol. So you have to make sure that alcohol is not their go-to. So as long as you've ruled out that they're an active abusing alcoholic or prescription meds, right? Because there are people that
I was going to say that after you were
Oxycontin,
done, that the
Percocet,
prescription meds are very much the other
and
problem.
Xanax, Klonopin, as long as the person is following it as prescribed and they're not abusing it, you can do EMDR work. But if there's any suspicion that they're getting it on the street, or they have a family member that gets it regularly and now they're using it to deal with their emotional pain, that person's not ready for EMDR. So, but as clinicians, you don't have to be afraid of doing EMDR with police and fire and veterans, as long as we rule out what I just said. But I don't find that first responders or veterans are afraid of doing it either. They want to feel better. And if you can do a session with them where you bring their distress level from here down to here and it's palpable to them, that is so gratifying for them, and it's gratifying for the clinician, because now they have hope. Now they have hope, like, wow, okay, so I don't have to live with all of this haunting me for the rest of my life and having crappy sleep. There's actually some hope that I can feel better, and I didn't even have to drink, or I didn't have to take a Percocet. I didn't have to take more Klonopin in order to calm my nervous system. So that's really encouraging.
But yeah, well, I would also say to you, there's a few things that I want to add to that. Is
Okay.
a lot of things that can get, as much as I don't want to ever use these words, but I'll use it on the podcast, but I don't use it with my clients. You want to speed up the process, figure out what the touchstone memory or the earliest memory is.
Yeah.
And typically taking care of those will take care of a lot of other ones. How I explain the process, you say broken, I say a little different. I say, look, your trauma is stuck in your midbrain or your limbic system right there. So every time it kind of shows up similar, you go into fight or flight mode because it's nowhere in your cerebral cortex.
Right.
I think EMDR does is that it creates those neural pathways to bring it to the long term and your cerebral cortex, so that it's still there. It's never going to go away, but it's no longer giving you that fight or flight response. So a little bit of what I explained. So I think it's
right. And I would do the same thing, but I was commenting on resistance because that was your question. So
yeah, but I think the resistance for me from therapists is there's this, oh, can I handle it? And I'm like, what's different working with Leos or a law enforcement officer?
yeah, I don't. That's not really something that.
No, but it comes up for me. And I
Yeah.
hear that a lot from therapists. How do you do it with them? Same as I do it with civilians?
Right.
I don't see the difference.
No.
And the other part too is I think that what happens a lot with different people is that they start feeling better. But I always remind them, I said, what I would like to do, you say you check for substance use. But for the first sessions, I also go like, either we'll go at the end of the day if you're going to go home and take it easy, or we do it at the beginning of the day if you come off shift and you're going to go to bed, because it can be exhausting at times.
It can. That's absolutely true. It does usually wipe people out. So I absolutely agree with that.
I think it's really the neural pathways just being formed that, as much as I believe in neuroplasticity, it
Correct.
takes energy. It takes a lot of energy that you're
Takes a
not
lot of
aware of.
energy.
It's not a run. it's really a lot of energy to
Right.
do.
And it could be someone who says that it was my first worst call. That's what I want to address because that's the one that keeps coming up. Well, now we're going back 10, 15, 20 years. And so I find the further back that you go, the more tired the individual is at the end of the session. That's what I find. So,
Yeah, I think
but
that you do use an example of one of them. I can't remember that it was a long, like it was a memory from years ago, and I can't remember who it was. I know I read it.
right. It might have been Officer Elstey with
Sounds right.
the dog had a deceased infant in its mouth. And that was, 20 years prior, and it was just as fresh for him. And the reason it stung so much, well, first off, it's an infant in a dog's mouth in the 73rd precinct, bad area, very tough area. There's the most homicides for New York, at least at that time, were happening in those precincts around there. And he had a baby girl at home himself, his daughter, and it was the same size as that infant. So that really stung for him. And he was just 1 week on the job, NYPD. So, they say time heals all wounds. It doesn't. It doesn't. Some of that stuff stays on board and really bothers the person. And so we went back 20 years and we resolved it. And he doesn't have any breakthrough images about that again, and no issues with like dog, because if you heard like a dog with a similar growl or saw from behind a similar sized dog, his mind would go to that, and it doesn't anymore because we resolved it with EMDR. It's now filed in his cortex, and if he wants to think about it, he can. So my concern became, well, what about, all this money is being dumped into officer wellness, right? I'm going to focus just on police
Well, you know
right
what?
now.
If we're going to do that, I just want to finish off a little bit on EMDR. Maybe if you want to stick around, we're going to do another half hour. I'd love to address that because I
Okay,
think
yes.
that's a half hour plus conversation in my
Okay,
mind.
all right.
And just to finish on EMDR. So let's break a little bit of the misconceptions. You talked about paddles. So you're
Yeah.
telling me that we're doing electroshock therapy.
That's what people think initially, right? And so, they're holding buzzers because, EMDR is based on bilateral. So whether you swing the eyes left and right, that's bilateral stimulation, or you have someone hold these buzzers and it's buzzing left, right, left, right, left, right. And then for my dispatchers who can't stop hearing the screaming from a particularly bad call, they're wearing a headset, kind of like what Steve's wearing now, and they're hearing a tone and they can hear me talk over that tone. And it's happening left, right, left, right, left, right. So the whole idea is bilateral stimulation. It prompts the healing part of the brain that is stuck to get moving again so that it can be taken out of the midbrain, the fight or flight part of the brain, and then be filed in a bad call file, if you will.
And I think that that's why, like for me, EMDR is really helpful. The other part that I want to finish on, and you tell me your thoughts about this too. If someone's in a rush and needs to do EMDR in a rush, what do you say?
I think it's clinically sound to do, you still have to do a full intake with the individual. This isn't a party trick. You could put someone into an ab reaction and then they can't go to work the next day. So no, I don't, it's not like, oh yeah, let's have some fun with this. No, I still have to do a full intake in order to, recognize what really is going into the picture. And then if next session they want to get started with the EMDR, then we can do that. But, you have to make sure that the client is safe and that they're ready to do this very deep work because it's a laser focused kind of work. We're not dancing around the topic. We are like zeroing in on a target, and it's actually called a target. That's what Francine Shapiro called it. So,
I think I want to finish on this, and I'm the same way. I would even we'll talk about the wellness stuff because I want to talk about the future of mental wellness and how we can train people. But what I do with people who come in with EMDR and wanting the express version of it, I'm like, well, I do believe that it takes time to trust your therapist and go through
yeah.
some of this stuff. So I like to build a relationship with you prior to doing so.
Mhm.
And I think that that's how you can get the comfort level. So you said exactly the same pretty much, but I want to put it in different words because for me, what's key is you're going to be talking about hard shit. So let's
Right.
not pretend that you're going to be like, yeah, Steve, I want to be fully open about this. Number two, rushing the process is what also
Right.
you tried to do with the alcohol or burying it as far as you can in your brain. How'd that work out for you?
Right.
So that's kind of my bullshit answers to people who give me bullshit questions. How about you stick around? We're going to talk a little bit about that stuff at the academy level. Again, just for this one, I would love to talk about Dump the Bucket, Healing Trauma in Police with EMDR. This is her book. It's amazing. If you want to know more about EMDR, this is the best way to learn from it, especially for first responders. But then we're going to talk maybe on the other side, not only about training and the tendencies to avoid therapy, but also about how we can talk to therapists, and maybe we can talk more about helping the helpers. So as we complete this episode, please join us on the next episode because Stacy's sticking around.
Please like, subscribe, and follow this podcast on your favorite platform. A glowing review is always helpful. And as a reminder, this podcast is for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes only. If you're struggling with a mental health or substance abuse issue, please reach out to a professional counselor for consultation. If you are in a mental health crisis, call 988 for assistance. This number is available in the United States and Canada.